one of the goals of any kind of leader, or a speaker for that matter, is to transform from the audience's position from "you're right" to "that's right."
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. So here's my story. And actually, it's literally my story. The first many years of my career, 15 years of my career out of college, 17, whatever it was, I was with an architecture firm. And while I was there, I was introduced to this concept that at the time I thought was actually kind of silly. But since then, I have ended up relying on it heavily in facilitation and leadership conversations about how you get people to do what you want them to do or what you need them to do, or how you solve problems. And it's this concept, which you are probably familiar with since you do a lot of construction law, which is means and methods.
Yep.
Is that, so it wasn't just my architecture firm that said that.
No,
it's actually a thing.
Actually industry-wide, yes.
I've always wondered about that. I'm like, was that just something we made up, or was that a thing?
Invent means and methods?
I don't know. So it's a contract law actual stipulation then, right?
Well, it's a construction industry term.
Gotcha. Okay. So here's my layperson version of means and methods. And if I'm wrong, then you can chime in because I know you're shy about telling me when I'm wrong. But so means and methods is that when you are designing a building, and say you're doing the specification book, which is the big book that goes with the drawings that says it's all the language and narrative and all the information about that fills out the rest of what's not drawn. And so you can't stipulate, this is at least for public projects. I'm sure for private projects you can do this, but at least on a lot of public projects, means and methods means that you can stipulate, you can't stipulate how someone does something or a specific window. You can't say, I want it to be Pella window C476. What you have to do is you have to state the criteria for that window. It needs to be a whatever rated glass with wood frame. It's like, yeah, you basically have to describe the window. It's almost like a game. It's like charades. You can't say not charades, but what's the game where you can't say the word? Like the pyramid game works that way. Doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about, right? Where they'll say like candy cane. You have to get the person to say candy cane, but you can't say candy cane. So like Christmas, it's red and white. It's got a hook. It's sort of like that. You have to describe the window with all the criteria that your goal is to try and make that criteria as specific that, you are aiming for this kind of window, but you can't say that specific window. And there's a reason for that. You may be able to say that better, but there's a lot of reasons for that, actually. You also can't stipulate how the contractor does the job. You can't say, first go do this and then go do this. You stipulate the outcome. You stipulate kind of what success looks like, I guess is another way to look at it. And then they get to get there however they want, right? So it's like the destination is yours to describe, but then the journey is theirs to figure out. Is that all fair? Does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, there are differences as far as when you can specify what the exact product is and when you can't, but that's true. You have a standard of care, you have the outcome, you have the litmus test for the outcome or the standards that the outcome has to match, and you have a project schedule.
Right. So here's
the contractor has to hit all of those benchmarks through whatever means and methods the contractor decides to employ.
Right. But to be silly about it, you can't be like, first you grab your hammer,
Correct.
And then you walk over to the thing. Not that anyone would stipulate it, but there are criteria. So anyway, this ends up coming up in at least like 2 or 3 different ways that I end up bringing it up a lot. One way has come up a lot recently, and another one I thought was a really creative way that it ended up coming up that applies right now to a lot of people figuring out work schedules and things. But I often run into people who are frustrated that their folks aren't coming to the table with a sense of like ownership or urgency of like they're going to do the project. Like they're sort of looking to the boss or leader or supervisor to be told what to do. they're not taking their own initiative. They're not being innovative. They're not running with a thing. They're not, it shows up in a lot of different ways. And almost always, well, one thing almost always, the person who's reaching out to me, the person trying to guide these people always assume, doesn't always assume, but a lot of times you'll hear they just don't care, or, you know, they're not interested. They're just trying to get away with this, or it's a millennial thing, or it's a this or that. And almost without fail, what I end up uncovering is that they have done the opposite of that means and methods, that, and usually for good reason. Usually it stems out of them being burned at some point, of people not doing things like, all right, I'm going to put some structure in place. So I tell people exactly what they want. They think they're setting expectations, but they're really like telling the person exactingly how to do it. And what ends up happening is that basically says to the human brain, you're not required to think here. Just take tab B, stick in slot A, do the thing. That's the right way to get a buzzer at the, you know, to get a piece of cheese at the end of the maze versus the buzzer. And you're basically training people to look to you for guidance of each step versus saying, here's the outcome I want. Here's my expectation for how this will feel or work, or here's what I expect to not happen. And then however that person wants to get there is their own business. And I experienced this in my own company as a funny story, but does that sound like a familiar?
That's one of the big criticisms of the core curriculum when you take math, the way math is taught, because very often they'll say, okay, well, you got the right answer, but you arrived at it at the wrong way. You didn't follow our steps. And so as a result, we're going to grade you down. In other words, the core curriculum, and I've been through this with my kids in many aspects, controls the means and methods. And I recognize the value of teaching a complicated operation by exemplifying the means and methods. But one of the main criticisms, and it gets to a leadership and management point of view, is at what point do you allow your people, presumably accomplished and intelligent people in your company, to simply understand the outcomes and the standards, that the benchmarks that they have to hit, and allow them control over the means and methods? Because if you don't, there is burnout, job dissatisfaction, and employee turnover, at least in my experience.
So much. And it's also counterintuitive, because there's something so much more satisfying. I mean, if you're the smart, creative people want to come to work and be smart and creative. And what I've, at the beginning of these conversations, I always point out that, you know, if you truly think you don't have smart people, then you have a whole other problem here. Like, that's a completely different issue. But usually it's not that. And I would want to test for that. Like, let's try this a different way and see what happens. And then if, you really do have people who just aren't willing to bring their A game, or who really just aren't that smart, or whatever it is, that's a different problem. But most of the time, the space has been constricted. And I absolutely know how these things end up happening. Like I said, I did it myself. For years, I was trying to do all my own scheduling, and I'm really bad at it. And it's not the best part of my brain. And it was tough for me to do in between other things. And I was usually doing it on my phone. So flipping back and forth between an email and a calendar, it was bogging me down. So I had all these systems in place to make sure I didn't forget things, and or that I didn't drop a ball, or that I knew how things stood. And so when I hired my assistant to help me, that scheduling was one of the things. And so I showed her everything that I had in place to do it, you know, to keep track of everything, make sure I didn't miss anybody, and that everything worked, and that I didn't forget. And like our third or fourth week, we were on our call, and we're both looking at the screen because she's remote. And I hear her say, well, hold on a second. I have to type this into my thing, I think she said. I was like, your thing? What? She goes, oh yeah, I keep track of all your stuff in my Outlook tasks. That's where I keep everything. And I was like, oh, you're not using we were using Wunderlist at the time. You're not using this Wunderlist thing that she's like, no, I just, she goes, I mean, I go through it with you so that you know where I am, and I keep it up to date so that you see what you need to see. But I actually keep track of it in my own system, because that's where everything is. And I was like, well, I don't need to see, like, all I care about is that people get scheduled and no one gets forgotten. So if you have a way to do that, I don't need you to fill out Wunderlist. And she's like, oh, that'd be great, because basically I have to log everything twice. I was like, I do not need you to do that. And so we stopped. The Wunderlist was there so that I could keep track of it. If she was going to keep track of it, I don't care if she does it with finger paints and water balloons, as long as the outcome is the same. And my goodness, like, I don't care how she does it, because she never drops the ball. She never forgets anything. I rely on her for that. But so I see people sort of accidentally painting themselves into that corner quite a lot. But here's the other place that gets really useful, is for problem solving and getting to the bottom of things. So I was talking with a client yesterday who was telling me a story about how they have resolved their some issues around which days of the week they're working. They had some pay cuts for a while, so they reduced by one day. So one day a week was off. Fridays were off while they had while they reduced salaries by 20% for a couple months. They also said, then you don't have to work on Friday, which is like a 20% cut in productivity as well. And they couldn't sustain that. And they're restoring salaries, but people really valued that time. So what is so interesting to me is a lot of times I will hear conversations just kind of stop instead of asking the next question, which we've talked about before. And in this case, she just kept saying like, oh, okay, well, if that's a problem with this system, then let's do a different one. So what they ended up doing was, they knew that people needed some time. They wanted to be able to say to people, you have flex time. As long as you're aiming for like 36, 38 hours a week, whatever, we don't really care when you work. So, but they do need collaborative time where people can reliably get in touch with each other. So they set some hours. I think it's like the afternoons, Monday through Thursday. Everyone really valued that Friday as being quiet. So they just made that a quiet Friday, where there's no meetings, no phone calls, no emails or Slack or whatever. And if you want to use part of that day to work, great. If you want to just get your work done Monday through Thursday, that's great. And not that system is the system, but I just loved listening to her. And there were a couple other layers to it. I loved listening as she went through, because one by one, I heard all the objections that I could imagine other people in that yeah, but you have to have time when you can get together. Great. Like, take all the pieces of the objections and problems and put them together with your wants. And they actually usually come together as a solution if you just stay focused on the outcome and not how you get there.
Okay. So I'm going back over my notes
That's a long ramble.
That was a long, that was
a really long ramble. This is what happens when we record in the afternoon. I just talk.
So I'm just trying to figure out where we start. Okay, so I'll run down my notes. The first thing was, and we've talked about this before, there's a book by Daniel Pink called Drive. And what Daniel Pink talks about as the three elements to employee satisfaction are mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And purpose is beyond the scope of our discussion. And mastery is the continuing education, so you can become a master of your craft. So there's some professional development no matter what you're doing. Autonomy, however, is directly on point to the story that you told, because it's means and methods. It says that I have a certain amount of autonomy to get to the desired destination. And there are two parts to that conversation. So my example is I hired a marketing director, Shelley Pagano, as you know. And at the beginning, as she came on board, at the beginning, of course, there's always this jostling back and forth as far as how much do you want to be involved? What do you need to know? What do I need to tell you? And I can give you all the communication in the world, but how much is too much communication, et cetera.
Right.
And as we've been going through this process, we got to the point where, and it's still developing, but she knows very well what the desired outcomes are, where we have to get to, what a lot of the benchmarks are. And she was saying, okay, well, this is what I want to do. I'm going to set up these meetings. I'm going to have this regular schedule. Do you want to be involved in the meetings? And my reaction is really, look, I love this stuff, but number one, I don't want to be perceived as micromanaging. I don't want people to automatically go to me if she's on the call because she's supposed to be in charge of this. And I don't want to appear disinterested on the other side. So but what I said to her is, look, I like this stuff. If you believe that I'm helpful to the process, I'll be involved. But there's the word director is in your title. You know where we have to go.
Yep.
And so you're good at what you do. So get that done. I'll be a resource. You can, and we can keep up to date ourselves. But I don't want to direct her means and methods.
No. And that's, yeah, exactly. And so a lot of times when people are frustrated that they're having to manage people so much, it's because they've inadvertently, at least I see this happening a lot, they have inadvertently set up a system that requires people to look to them for guidance to know whether to go left or right. My daughter's been watching Survivor a lot, and having us watch with her. And a couple nights ago, they were doing the thing where like somebody's up on the pedestal and they have to yell out to the blindfolded person, like, go left, go left, go left. Now go under the thing. Like you can't move without, like somebody else has to tell you where to go because you're blindfolded. And it sort of looks like that sometimes, where they don't know what you want. They can only be guided by your snippets of approval or disapproval because they don't have a sense of the same North Star that you're aiming for.
Right. And that can be a learned behavior as well, that
for sure.
They expect that you're going to micromanage. So then whatever autonomy they had developed or whatever they want to develop, that's not clearly the way it's done here. And so they wait for that specific direction. And, from my perspective, especially with the people that I'm working with Shelley, for example, the reason I hired her is because she knows a lot more about marketing than I do. So if I try to micromanage somebody who's better at something than I am depriving myself and my organization of her expertise.
Yeah, it really does. I think it is one of the defining differences between leading and managing. It's not just that, but because there are places and times and positions that require much more of a management. I still am not a big fan of micromanagement, but managing, there are some things that need a far more amount of managing. But even then, like I really struggle. If I think about even the most basic job out there, it's hard for me to defend a position that somehow anything benefits from like the take tab B, stick in slot A. Like you want people thinking, you want people to have the concept of what you're after and a clarity of what matters to you, what a good outcome consists of, so that they aim there.
And the other part of it is I want people at any position to be able to figure out for themselves what works. Because we had talked about this in terms of a message, that one of the goals of any kind of leader, or a speaker for that matter, is to transform from the audience's position from you're right to that's right. Because when it's that's right, they buy into it. Yeah, that's right. This is the way it's supposed to work. If I were to give somebody precise moment by moment instructions on how to do something, if they stay in that job, they may very well get to the you're right, but they're not going to start experimenting around and figure out, well, this did take me longer. No, I could do it this way, and get to that's right. And it's only when they get to that's right that they figure out what works best for them, and they become more autonomous and they can get there more efficiently.
And they may get there a better way than you do. Like you may have a faster way. They may get further than you are aiming for because they have another way to come at it. I mean, you can't leverage what people bring to the table if you don't give them space to bring their brain to the table. And this came up again today. Someone was talking about, they were frustrated with a management level, the level below them that they run, that they're not coming to these meetings and interacting and being a part of it. And I said, well, is it the right meeting design? And like, is it like set up in a way that actually gets what you need out of people or serves the purpose of the meeting in the first place? And he goes, yeah, I should probably redesign it. I mean, that's what I designed it for, but it's been changing. And I was like, well, pause. I was like, it's their meeting. Like you're putting it, the whole reason this topic came up was because they were getting feedback from the staff that there was this component missing from how they do things. And so he said, well, that's what that blah, blah, blah meeting is for. And so we started talking about that meeting. I said, okay, like they're asking for this. Instead of you trying to guess. Like, that's the thing. Like, this way is so much easier if you invoke this when you're trying to solve problems for other people instead of trying to solve it yourself. He was all prepared to go off and try and redesign this meeting so that they would feel like they were getting what they needed. When instead, I said, like, take a crack at pulling them all together and saying, first of all, do we all agree that we need, that we all want X, Y, Z, like, and that you're not getting it right now? Let's assume that's a yes. Great. How do we get that? Like, I tried to make this meeting for that. If a meeting's the right way to do it, how would a meeting be structured so that you get what you want out of it? Because if not, maybe it's not even a meeting, or maybe it is a meeting, but it's done a totally different way. Like, how can we get you what you need? And then you don't have to figure it out yourself. And they came up with it. So if it doesn't work, they're going to be more invested in helping you fix it. It just, I don't know, it feels like in defensive, easier leadership.
Well, it is. There's an enormous amount of weight. It's like those deep sea fish when they finally rise to the surface, before they explode from the internal pressure. I have to believe there's this one moment where they're like, and there's that one special moment. But for leadership,
before they explode, I presume.
Yes, and then they explode. So
also like leadership.
I think that the key is for leadership is to take that external pressure off of you to the point where you can go, and not explode. I think you have to find that. And a lot of that.
Don't be a deep sea fish.
And, we're going to get some ichthyologist hate mail, talking about.
It's not funny that they explode.
Right. Stop hating on fish. But
if I get to find out that we have ichthyologist listeners, I will just be like really pleased by that. So I'll bring on the hate mail.
I think there's a whole ichthyologist faction within the SHMS community. And I could be proven wrong, but I think there is. But I think that removing the means and methods, the pressure for dictating means and methods for everybody in your organization is a good part of the pressure of leadership. And if you remove that, I think it just does wonders for the organization and for your mental health.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jodi Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.